I'm not sure if we are on air. Hello, everyone. I hope you all are tuning in. I think it might take a few minutes for us to click in, but I'm very excited about this to be here and share with you in this talk as part of the series of the Turbine Art Fair 2020 in a very innovative way of exploring the exhibition this year through this talk called Threaded Visions. And I'm very excited to be joined by Sharlene Khan, who's the curator of one of the most intriguing for me as a fashion designer exhibitions called Tactile Visions Woven. Sharlene?
Hi, Craig.
Hello. Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. And thank you very much for this opportunity to engage with you.
Yes, this is exciting. You know, I wanted to start off by, I found this quote quite recently, which says that fashion is the armor which allows us to survive the realities of everyday life. And I thought about that, and I thought about that especially in now more than ever, we do need armor and protection. And the armor, the manifestation of that armor is the material from which our clothes are made. And for me as a designer, my challenge is to take something that's two-dimensional and reinterpret it in a three-dimensional way. And my considerations are always about looking at silhouette, color, shape, and how to enable the wearer to feel a different way, or kind of allow them to expose something, express themselves through clothing. Also to be intuitive of what's happening around the world, or how the world changes and interest shifts and changes. But when it comes to textile in art, it's almost like generally textile is the material. It's not the form, but it's an aspect of the work. And here, textile has been elevated as kind of centrality of an exhibition. So I'd love to know why elevating textile and woven in that way.
So when the invitation came from Aisha, I don't often take on curatorship. I don't have the patience often to work with artists. I would have the egos. Artistic egos, because I'm an artist myself.
Yes.
So I really have to. A theme of a curated exhibition has to really grab me, and as somebody who works with sewing aspects in my own work, and with women's art, I have a keen interest on a scholarship level. I just couldn't pass up this opportunity, because our country has such a rich history and legacy of tactile arts, that I thought one of the things that I was interested in was having a conversation that, as you say, centralized textile-based works, and didn't treat it in sort of, this kind of othered way, this prettified, oh, look at how nice and beautiful textiles are, but rather looked at it in this kind of centralized ways in our lives, that textiles are the basis of everything. They cover our entire lives. They are woven into the intricacies of who we are, and that our proximities to objects, our proximities to textiles basically reveals who we are, that objects becomes racialized, objects become genderized, objects become classed in our proximities to us. And they reveal so much about who we are as individuals, as collectivities, as societies. And so even when we don't seem to be around, by just looking at these objects, we can tell so much about where we are as individuals and as societies, sometimes in really great ways and sometimes in very troubling ways as well. And so I wanted to have an exhibition that didn't frame textiles in these very, this is craft, this is fine art, this is fashion, these kinds of neat boxes, but just have an exhibition that was very fluid in the sort of very fluid way that our African lives are. And so that was what was interesting about having this particular exhibition in this way.
Right. I'm fascinated by that, and the fact that, because ordinarily, I must admit, even when I was asked to give this talk and I was approached, I thought, I mean, it's a textile, and that was the automatic assumption that it would be about looking at like another form of textile and looking at it from a fashion perspective. And I love the fact that you did open the door, kind of almost like reimagine the thread in a different way. And I suppose, I mean, you've touched on that you don't normally take on curatorial duties. So I'd love it if we can also, if you could explain a little bit in case some people are not aware of the dimensionalities of who you are and how that informed how you put together the exhibition and the considerations you took in terms of process.
So yeah, so I am a visual artist first and foremost. I make a number of different works. I'm a painter. I also do photography badly, videos badly, but I also do embroidery and lace making as well, needle lace, and so part of what I doing needle lace, for instance, which was something I learned since 2009. Because I'd heard that my illiterate grandmother had learned this technique, was how laborious these processes are, and it's so painstaking. And so when you see these remarkable works by women artists, you know how much of time goes into these works. And sometimes they're really, really small. If you see a Senzeni Mahasela work, if you see a Mary Sabande work, if you see a Wilhelmine de Villiers work, they might be really small, sometimes in dimensions. But if you know the amount of hours that go into making this work, that every single stitch is a stitch, right? And so you appreciate the absolute skill and hours of labor that goes into it, and women's work is often a lot of invisibilized labor. So that's also where my, as a feminist scholar who lectures at Wits University in the fine art department, I run an African feminist conference, a Black feminist killjoy reading group. I am a Black feminist killjoy by training.
What is a Black feminist killjoy?
That's exactly what I killjoy as a professional basis, whether it is white people's joy, white supremacy joy, or whether it is patriarchal joy or classist joy. You go around killing that joy when that joy seeks to have comfort at the expenses of the masses. So That's what a Black feminist killjoy is.
I've never heard that before, and I'm fascinated by that. Just before we continue, I want to say everyone, you can chat to us. And I see that Glynis actually has made a great comment to you, Sharlene, that I think you want to comment on. She mentioned your jackets, talking about textiles.
Yes, I had this made, Glennis. So it was made for a work. I make African art, and I was trying to make it for. I was spoofing a Yinka Shonibari artwork, and so I copied the Yinka Shonibari artwork, and I had this made by a Congolese dressmaker.
Wow.
And so
Exquisite.
yeah, but
Oh,
of
and
course,
Scott,
you're very much into wax fabric as well, aren't you?
yes. I mean, it's kind of, look, I mean, I love exploring all aspects of African print and trying to find ways of elevating them. I think it's because it's mostly been associated for a long time with ceremony and with occasion. So in terms of my clothing label, it's taking those prints and making them an everyday wearable, giving people to wear it in everyday environment as opposed to only limiting it to ceremony and that sort of thing. That image that's just come up, or just too. So with my clothing label Fundutsi, it's inspired by a sacred lake by the Venda people who believe you can hear their ancestors drumming underneath the water at night. And from that story, I fell in love with the Venda print. Actually, no, it was the other way around. I fell in love with the Venda print, and then I found out about the mythology. And so in the beginning of my journey as a designer, I started exploring the print in different ways. And the next slide, you'll be able to see on the left-hand side of the screen was using the vendor print in a very obvious way, but cutting it in a way which is hopefully a little bit more glamorous and couture. And then a few years later, finding ways of segmenting and cutting it and splicing it to let it live in another way in conjunction with other fabrics. But going back to process, I want to just ask you about that, because I mean, I think about my process as a
Before we get to
designer.
process, I want to ask you a question. How does somebody
Okay.
who studied sociology go from sociology to journalist to doing presenting a fashion program, and then going on to becoming, well, a huge eco fashion star basically in South Africa? I mean, you're a brand ambassador, right, for Johannesburg as well.
Yes. It's so funny because you played down a bit about all your titles. I mean, award-winning, you've done residencies, you're a convener of a very powerful feminist organization, as well as like kind of an academic. So I think I could relate to it when I asked you about yourself, because I don't really like kind of elevating or kind of promoting what I do. But I mean, really, the sociology part is I studied media, did media studies and sociology as my major, and I'm always really interested in what does it mean when we do the things we do, and from a media point of view, it was about how to tell stories, and then clothing became an extension of that, because I realized that we communicate with clothing. So that was part of my journey, but everything was really quite fluid. And trying to reconcile the worlds together is always a little bit difficult, because I mean, a lot of people know me in media as someone who goes to fabulous parties and to write things in a little bit of a spicy way, whereas my day job is to to be a fashion activist, to tell people, instill pride in what makes us unique as Africans, and also to be conscious about what we're wearing. So the sociology part is all about just putting it all together, I suppose.
I mean, and I think that's something that is shared with the artists. So many of them are constant. That's a thread that runs through the exhibition with the artists, is that the objects that you see are stories. They're all layered with stories. So the tea trays, that whether it's in Nona's work or whether it's in Wilhelmine's work, they're using tea trays from their mothers, from their grandmothers. Those are invested with stories. Zodwa's the collective that she works with, the Nonzama Old Age Center.
Yes.
The women are sitting around telling stories about their lives, and that was very important to Zodwa's process. As a curator, she's worked 2 years with this group, and it was very important not to have the kind of infantilizing relationship that craft organization have with Black women. And these are women that are women that she's grown up with. And so she wanted to be part of the group with them, to have them be part of the curating process with her. You've been speaking about process. And so the process was quite important, that they are part of the curating process with her right till the end, right till the display. And she's part of the making process with them. And so the way the storytelling process, the way they sit together and they tell stories about their lives, are invested in the objects that they make. So the aesthetics and the prettiness that we see on display, that's great, all the colors and stuff that we are seduced by. But the objects actually contain the memories and the histories and the stories of all the people and the producers that make these works. So what we're getting is not just a pretty object. What we are getting are the histories and the textures of the lives that make these works. And that's why they're such precious art, because we're actually getting the most incredible textured histories of the people of our country, and I think that's something that I picked up in the ways in which you make your work as well.
Yeah, I have to say, I love that you picked that up, because on one level, talking about the beadwork and that collaboration is in a simplistic way how people might imagine an entire exhibition would be, because it's about beadwork, and we automatically relate that to South Africa. And I mean, in terms of craft, craft is, so many people are artists in South Africa, but they're not recognized as artists. They're recognized as crafters. And government often talks about the second economy and the importance of the second economy, but it's almost like categorizing people who do beadwork and do craft in a way that they're workers and artisans as opposed to artists. Mm-hmm. So I love that's part of the exhibition. And just going on that in terms of fashion design, the maker has now also been elevated as a person of prominence in the creation of garments. Globally, there's a lot of questioning about how garments are made. And it's not just about the fabrication, but it's about the people who made them and the ethics that ensuring that everything is done ethically. We've seen things, and especially with the advent of fast fashion, where fashion has become commodified and it's become disposable. A trend forecaster said a few years ago that it's a bizarre situation in the world today where a dress can cost less than a sandwich. And what we often forget about is when we purchase something and we say, oh, I I got such a deal, it was so cheap. We don't think about the person who made it and what they had to pay, the price they had to pay in terms of making it. When we have people who work in sweatshops and in the Far East, who have been chained to a sewing machine and paid less than the minimum wage to produce something that we wear as something that makes us happy, and we don't think about the unhappiness that it was part of the process of making it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's also what interested me of, in someone like, at the moment I have Scott Eric Williams' work
Yes.
on the screen. Was thinking through, for instance, Crazy Shoelaces. And for those of us who were, children and teenagers in the 80s and 90s, we recognize these things, right? And the ways in which, we decorated our sneakers and stuff with these things. And the ways in which, they're created in China and they're sold in South Africa, in Scott is speaking about in his area by Somali traders, and the ways in which South African economies are working, the disposability, the precarity of lives, but the ways in which we are not thinking through these lives. We are actually, sometimes we don't think about the changing faces of South African urbanscape and what it means, because we sometimes can actually just turn a blind eye to these processes, what these processes mean. And I think and I think this is the power of art, that it actually does have the capabilities to hold up this mirror and make us stop and think about the fact that this is where we are as a society, right? And Scott shows us the changing face of Belleville, or what he calls once was, a Boerewors community. And now it's an entirely different kind of community, and so South Africa is changing in all sorts of ways, and of course right now with COVID, it's going to be very interesting how that is going to play out, not just in South Africa but across the world. Because it's capitalism. People have been predicting, at least since sort of 2011, that we're starting to see the breakdown of capitalism and democratic capitalism. And it's going to be a fundamental shift, because democratic capitalism, as we know it, could not sustain itself in the ways that it was going, ignoring the plight of the many. And this is going to have implications for your industry, for my industry.
Absolutely.
And so I do want to ask you, for us, for our industry, even sitting here in a talk at the art fair, it's about how many art fairs can be sustained going forward, the biennales, the movement. But for your industry, it's there's been questions around the amount of fashion shows, the ways in which fashion shows have been going at the speed that it was. So where do you see that happening?
Look, I think a few years ago, I made a decision that I didn't want to showcase at a fashion show anymore, because I realized that with the digital realm and social media, that the specialness of fashion was diluted. I would watch presenting a collection, and you spend quite a few months, like you do in art exhibition, putting the whole thing together. And then you have a front row filled with people taking pictures of themselves as opposed to paying attention to the clothes. And then the clothes as well get immediately transmitted, and the power of them becomes diluted because people want it automatically straight away. They don't find the and because there's a beauty in terms of when you create something, and and you have to wait for it to arrive. And the immediacy in the world today is like, I want it now. And I started thinking about this and thinking, is this where I want to be? And I mean, we've come to a situation now in the world where, on average, someone purchases, I think it's, we have forgotten all these figures now, but basically, we throw away so much clothes that, I mean, in America, clothing is the second biggest cause of landfill. And I thought, I don't want to be part of an industry, even if I'm making something that's environmentally friendly and ethical, that's going to end up on a rubbish bin. So I started re-looking at things, and what I really tell, I mean, my customers, some of them will say, like, don't buy it unless you really need it. And think about the other things in your wardrobe, and think about how you can make them last longer. We had a period until, I mean, even up to the 80s when we had a local tailor when something got ripped or torn, and we went to them. Or if you needed to alter your clothes, you know, you thought about it and you held it precious. Whereas today, it's just something disposable. It's in one season and in and out another. And I think the fashion industry in particular is responsible for a lot of the ills in the world today, because this concept about everything gets reinvented every 6 months. And in fact, there's even more seasons because there's pre-fall, there's cruise. It's forced this whole consumer system to speed up. And it's permeated in so many other industries because it went from fashion to decor, to cars that then automatically had to be brought out, new models all the time, to cell phones, which all other electronics, which we didn't need to update all the time. And that's not a healthy situation to live in. And then so I think, I mean, I do think that the fashion show, I mean, we've seen this through the last few months, that fashion weeks around the world have been trying to interrogate how do we tell a story. And many have tried to go into this digital realm and done it really badly, where they've been off key, and tried to sell a message that no longer resonates in the world today. So I think for me, I've found the last few months quite an indulgent opportunity to internally gaze and to find a way of resetting and infusing meaning. And going to arts, I'd like to explore that a little bit more, because I actually wanted to ask you this, because ordinarily when I go to an art exhibition, I mean, it's all about walking around and looking at the artworks, and especially when it's an exhibition about something tactile, that normally it's associated with touch. And we're in a world today where touch is not a good thing. So in terms of you putting together the exhibition, I'm not sure when you were asked and when the world changed or paused, as I like to say. And did you take that as a consideration in terms of putting everything together?
Yeah, so that was quite difficult, because the invitation did come last year, and towards the end of the year, and so there was an entirely different vision at that time.
Yes.
And a lot of it was, the idea was a set of artists were chosen, and my idea was that a core group was chosen, and then a second group was chosen to in dialogue with them.
Right.
And so even in terms of the physical space, a certain people would have been set up in dialogue with each other. And so if you saw Mary Sabande and the way a Mary Sabande installation was set up, the people next to her, their physical works would be in dialogue with the way her works were constructed. And so when COVID happened, COVID happened. and so it meant actually choosing different works. So, for instance, there were completely different works that I had to choose from Scott Eric Williams. He has these incredibly beautiful sort of minaret kind of works that I wanted them to be in conversation with different Tanya Peterson works and with Iksan Adam works. So it was going to be an entire room that was around the sort of a religious room, a spiritual room. So the space, the issue of being able to walk into a space and physically engage with work. Bev Batko's work was something that you would walk into a very dark room, and it's light and shadow play. So all of those things you were kind of denied as in terms of an exhibition. Oratiles is a performance. You have to be there for the live performance. The same thing with Lindelwa's. Lindelwa's is an actual performance. So all of those things you can't recuperate online, and so there's a loss there that you can't have. And then with lockdown as well, we just couldn't record certain works. It was just not possible to even do up until this point. And so there's a little bit of sadness about that. But some of the artists took it as a challenge to then either do certain other kinds of works. So Bev actually then organized that installation and videoed it. Mary allowed us to use a different work, and which was very interesting. And thankfully, Turbine allowed us to bring in her warrior work, which is a sculpture, and allowed us to say, well, listen, can we have this discussion about sartorial codes and through a sculpture, and which is fantastic, because for us to be able to discuss this thread of warriors was fantastic through sculpture. So there is this element of warriors that runs throughout, with Bushle Bezwe, Siwani, you see, and let me show you in this some of these slides.
Yes.
So you see Mary's work here, right? She's dealing with this notion of this Yasuke, this African samurai who fought 400 years ago in Japan. So she's using Sophie, this avatar that she has, to now discuss other African stories, which is a very powerful an idea, right? Using her own body to then be a purveyor for other African stories across the world, because we don't really have images of Yasuke. And then you have Bushle Bezwe's work, and let me just also find. And here, Bushle Bezwe is looking at African bells, and the African bells that here we have. Here's Lindelwa's work. Lindelwa Masuku's. She's using Swazi cloth, and she's looking at. Even though she says that she knows that Swazi culture can be very patriarchal, but she's also looking at how the current king's mother was an incredible matriarchal figure that laid the foundations for independence, and was incredible with the kinds of laws she set down. And so she creates this body armor for women. And she wants to look at how women can use these body armor and negotiate space within Swazi culture for their own independence. And it's very difficult to negotiate these slides as one is talking here. I have to say,
I think you're doing a fantastic job.
And then, so these ideas of here we go, of these bells. Bushle Bezwe has these bells that are worn by the Zionist Church, by the Shembe people, by different, different African Christian organizations. And she looks at the ways in which, African spiritualities and have been demonized. But she's looking at women as prayer warriors. And she's looking at the ways, and then, in Reshma Chipa's work, for instance, she's looking as Kali, as a warrior who laps up blood. And so this element of warriors that also runs through all of these works via the spiritual element. So it's really amazing for me how even though there's such multiple expressions in all of these different works, that these elements of warrior go through.
Before you continue, if you have a slide for Reshma's work, because that is the most beautifully striking, evocative piece. Oh, you don't have it. Sorry. Love to share it to people.
If you show your warrior work, because you also deal with warriors in your work, okay. I can get a slide.
Okay, so I mean, if we can, so that starting point, actually, there's a collection. The warrior for me was always, I suppose, at the back of my mind when I created Fundutsi in 2004. Because I was thinking about, I remember finding this quote by someone called George Kimball, who said, "The darkest thing about Africa is our ignorance." And when I started my label, I wanted to try and change this perception that people have about African design. And then a few years ago, because of the sociology part of me, I'm always looking at what's happening in the world. And I mean, I came across this Russian activist group called Pussy Riot, who were questioning the nature of the political situation in Russia. And slogans started coming prominent, and I started seeing a lot of them, and coming across things like "Eat the Rich," which I thought was such a powerful expression. So I did a collection which I'm not an artist, so often my titles are very obvious. It was called Protest, and there were T-shirts that said Protest. But it started, and someone, a fellow designer, said to me, "That's such a political collection," and I never thought of it as political. I just thought it was expression. And then from there, that slide before was coming to look at exploring this idea about warrior, and then the next slide was just obvious warrior T-shirt. And from there, I started looking at other elements about this, because a warrior for me is very much like we've got so many strong warrior icons in African history over time. And I mean, so I wanted to explore that in different ways and look at embracing a strong aesthetic of Africa, and then playing with different concepts around men and women. So in terms of the next slide, the dress and the skirt, and realizing actually that in Africa, men wear dresses. But when we put on like westernized clothing, we think it's a strange thing to see a man in a dress. So I wanted to look at like kind of a strong vision and an image of a warrior, but also kind of question what the warrior wears. And that's kind of how I play with warrior a little bit. It's something that is going to go in terms of looking at armor and exploring different elements of armor. So I love the Swazi concept of embracing that armor to celebrate your femininity. And I think also at this time we need to look at our clothing to also armor us from what's happening around us. But I wanted to also come back to you about asking you about the challenge of doing something in the world we're living today, in terms of the exhibition and the fact that we cannot experience it in real life. And I went through the exhibition in preparation for this, and I actually found it such a wonderful, intimate opportunity, because normally, like I said, I have two jobs, and my second job at night is to go to functions, and I'll go to a lot of gallery openings, and often when you do, you're looking at a work, but then you meet someone and you chat to them and you're having a drink, and you're not really immersing yourself completely into the experience. Whereas now there's such a amazing intimacy that it's just you and the artwork in front of you, and the mode of being able to do it, you can pause, you can think, you can go back. So it's a format which I think will hopefully enable so many other people to explore art in a way where they don't feel threatened about having to go to a gallery. Will I be, you know what I mean? Like kind of, because there is an elitism around art and going to galleries. Whereas now anyone can access it. And the people who those who appreciate art can now look at it in a way where they can immerse themselves in an experience that ordinarily you can't really do in a gallery space where you're interacting with other people.
Yeah, I mean, you said you spoke about how at fashion shows, people, are they in the front row taking pictures of themselves? We also have that equivalent, and I'm also very guilty. Like on opening nights, the works that I know best.
So am I. Instagram addict
I,
here.
I know the works best around any table that has food, and also you're there to be seen, and you're there talking with people. So if you're a scholar, you don't go to opening nights to see work. You go there to be seen and to let people know that you're there to support them. But you go the days after that to actually see the work in peace and quiet, and to experience the work. And you go multiple times. But the online viewing does help in a different kind of intimate way. And I'm sure you must have felt that maybe around, say, someone like Nono's video, to have it in your ear and to feel the intimacy of those videos. I absolutely love Nono's videos.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm so glad you brought that up. And everyone, when you go into the viewing rooms, you really need to check it out. Actually, you need to check out everyone. But Nono, for me, was such a powerful thing about the dombolo and the recipe. And you're watching this, and she's having a conversation with her mother, and her mother is giving her the recipe for how to make the dombolo. But then you realize that the recipe is not just about dombolo. It's the ingredients of a story about the family hierarchy and intimacy and relationship. And when you watch that and the visuals, and then you start seeing the preparation of this dish and the dimensions that the dish preparation takes on, becomes even more powerful. And I think that's the most exquisite thing, to be able to experience that. But the tea train and these found objects, the doily. I mean, these are things that we take for granted because they are like the mundane or kind of the everyday elements of all our lives. I mean, we know going to your grandmother's house, you're going to see a tea cozy, you're going to see a doily, and then these things take on, the textiles just become something completely different. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that. I mean, about the doily gun, about the tea train, and also about the tapestries of Wilhelmine, because Wilhelmine's work as well really moved me, because originally I looked at this and I thought this feels very familiar, because it's crochet work. And then you start looking at it, and then you start looking at the fragility of its canvas, and then you start looking at the stitches, and you see a completely different dimension.
So yeah, and I think, what's interesting about all of these, so Nono's work is she's having this, she calls her mother, and she's asking her mother for this recipe, and nobody usually makes ledombolo for one. It's usually made for a whole family. But here's this exercise of saying, well, here, I'm going to make this thing for one person. And it's a revolutionary act to take care of yourself, as a Black woman in the first instance. And then she starts subtitling this, because the entire video, she's actually still having this, her mother's still giving her this recipe. But then she starts having this imaginary conversation where her mother's giving her advice on love. But this is an imaginary conversation, because these are not questions that she can really ask her mother. And I don't know about you, but these are not conversations I could have with my mother and father as well about love. Like, tell me like the real things I want to know about heartache and how to get over it, and about sex, and about how to really love, and how to really grieve, and all of these things. And so she starts to have this imaginary conversation, and it's the most wonderful use of feminist imaginary that I've seen. And it's so poetic and so beautiful, the staging of the feminist imagination in this way. And then in the work pudding as well, the ways in which she stages this intimacy between her mother and herself. And then you see it in so it moves between the languages of love and violence in all of these artists' works, the ways in which women's spaces, the private spaces, can be incredibly violent, the ways in which we our intimate spaces are so infused with love. They're so infused with care, but in those spaces, they're also incredibly violent as well, right? And so in Lebohang's work, and I have the slide here, we see this. She takes this doily, and she's using a monotype, and with monotype you just do a singular print, right? You're not doing multiple prints. And this old doily here, we all have these, maybe grew up with these doilies. I completely hated them, but there's also that whole economy, right? That has subsidized people across the world. In our communities, it was also this whole tradable economy as well. People came and traded and bartered things for doilies as well. And here she's speaking about what is left of you. sometimes when they tell things about you. And it's an incredible metaphor, this once-off print that she's doing, the story that they tell about you, and what's left of you after they talk about you, what's left of you when you're this killjoy in a family setting, when you don't fit in, when you're the odd one out. And so she's using this process of the monotype, the once-off, to talk about what it feels like when you don't fit into a family, right? And that even within a family space can be quite violent. It's incredibly beautiful, and I was just so moved when I saw these works, so I also, also with Wilhelmine's work, you think about these acts, when you saw these Jane Austen movies and you read these stories, right? These women sitting there very quietly sewing in the corner as all of these people spoke about them as their futures were decided in Victorian times, these middle-class women. But then you think, oh, well, women don't have any levels of violence in them. But if actually you think that we have the capabilities of stabbing a cloth thousands of times, I think we are capable of huge levels of violence. But the fact that we direct it towards a cloth and not other people's bodies tells the amount of patience that we have, the amount of care that we have, and it shows the ways in which women have been socialized into this kinds of passivity, and the ways in which they have had to direct their rage against what is happening. And I think that's what Wilhelmine's work talks about. It talks about a lot of rage, but also the ways in which women direct their rage as well. And we'll be having this talk a little bit later. But you also see that in Dean Hutton's work as well. Dean Hutton makes these huge, beautiful works that are monuments of love. And, they're these huge light sculptures. And they come out after, Dean did these artworks, and they against white supremacy. And she had lots and lots of, and she still can. Dean has lots of. They have lots of violence still directed against them, and Dean has taken that violence and created these loving artworks. And it's crazy the ways in which constantly we take violence and hatred and we make beautiful things out of it.
Yes. I think it's important as well to mention Oratile. I don't know if we mentioned Oratile before, because I mean we're talking about these issues, but it doesn't mean that it's only women can explore these issues that resonate with women or that have a perspective. And can you just tell me a little bit about, I mean, Oratile's The Bed We Made, and why it was important to have that as part of the exhibition?
So Oratile was supposed to have done a performance, and two performances, and the performance is a wonderful staging where we see these two characters in this sort of bed setting, and it's the way that one character comes in, and the character is in a suit and there's this dress, and we see the way the younger boy has to clean up after this one character. We see these kind of gender dynamics. But on this bed, there's also these names that are inscribed, all these black male names that are inscribed. On the walls, there's the story that picks up where of Ken Temba's The Suit. That's the bed that we made. The red dress takes that red dress and takes it into a public performance where Oratile is ironing this dress, and there's these posters that he prints, and they speak about hurt and gendered hurt. And so all of Oratile's sort of, and his work is very multidimensional because he moves between the private space, the public space, and he's constantly talking about sort of gendered violence. He's speaking about public and private hurts between relationalities that we have, and the ways in which we love and we hurt each other, the ways in which toxic masculinities are formed, and the ways in which and he's using the Setswana pronoun ene, which moves between him and her, and he uses that that play between that fluidity to also play in his work as well. And so on the bed you'll see all these names of male names that he collected in Braamfontein. While I'm speaking, and I'm telling you, I'm really hopeless in scrolling and speaking at the same time. But we see these names on this bed, and so you start to wonder, what are these names speaking to? Are they absent lovers? If this relates to a Ken Temba story, The Suit, we remember how The Suit ended. It ended in this seeming forgiveness that drove somebody to suicide. It was incredibly violent act. This absent lover. What is this? What is this red dress signifying? The red dress that he had made for this performance has all these these magazines, women's magazines that are printed onto them. So they're speaking also to the constructions of women's identities as well, and the ways in which the media constructs women's identities. So there's this constant questioning about the ways in which our identities are constructed from within and without through language, and is built up as well. And how can we rework these identities to form new ones around issues of love, especially when there's been so much damage that has been done as well.
I love that, and that's a great way to end our talk about, with that slide, how to love. Before we go, let's just go through the comments so that in case we haven't responded to everyone, and apologize. Wilhelmine was on with us. Hi, Wilhelmine. Thank you. Pinky,
we're going to be chatting to Wilhelmine later, if that's the Wilhelmine de Villiers.
Yes. Pinky's asked, speaking of processes, how does one immerse themselves in any production process respectfully in a way that will evident in the end result? So how can we immerse ourselves in a process respectfully, I suppose, is what Pinky is asking there. Do you want to answer that, or?
I want you to maybe finish off on this, because let's bring it to maybe an eco process.
Yes.
Because many of us may have an interest in developing an eco consciousness in terms of eco fashion. How would we, for instance, start with that? Because I don't know the difference between organic fabric and between upcycling, and I don't know what greenwashing is, so I don't know any of these terms. How does one even start to enter into some kind of eco consciousness around the fashion industry?
When I started, for me it was all about trying to utilize as much organic and green fabric. So I've made dresses out of bamboo, out of soy, And then I remember just before the world changed, I was in Abu Dhabi and I was on a panel at the World Sustainable Summit. And I was asked by the convener, who's one of the most brilliant media people, the editor of Vogue Arabia, and he turned to me and he said, "So what new innovations are there in terms of fabrics which are eco-conscious?" And I looked at him and I said, "You know what, to be honest with you, I'm at a point in my life now where I can create something biodegradable, but what's the point if it does end up becoming landfill?" And I realized as well that in terms of what's happened in the sustainability world is it's become almost like an elitist gallery opening where people feel that they want to embrace it, they want to experience it, but how do I do this if I enjoy drinking champagne and I drive a four-wheel drive? And I thought about this a lot, and my thing is that what we need to do is, firstly, when you want to become truly sustainable, then you've got to think consciously about what you purchase. It doesn't have to be an organic t-shirt. It just has to be a t-shirt that you embrace and celebrate and hold precious and you don't throw away. I think that's, for me, more important than anything else. And if you can no longer wear it and you can't repurpose it, then find a way of giving it to someone or turning it into something else. And I think that's the same way that you can take that doily and make it a Makoti gun, or you can take a tea tray and tell a story on it. I think we have to look at clothes. We have to elevate clothes back to the way they were before, where we invested in clothes because they were important in us expressing ourselves, not something that we wear and then we throw away. That's my answer.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I think that's something that also came out in this this exhibition reminded me of, that in this country we have people who let us know their aspirations via how they value clothes.
Yes.
And that is not something that we should ever look down upon, and that is not something we should ever judge. And that in a country where people don't have property rights, can't afford a car, that clothes is still the marker by which people can actually let us know their aspirations. Mary Sabandi reminded me of that, and that's still really, really important.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Is there anything else we need to address?
I think we've answered all the questions, hopefully. I saw Linda's just said, fantastic. You've moved, fantastic discussion. You've moved effortlessly between art, social science, environmental issues, and literary studies. Thank you, Sharlene and Craig. I don't think we planned on doing that, but thank you, Linda, for that. And I think on that note, I think we can end it because.
Yes. And thank you very much, Craig, for this discussion.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to be thinking about this for days afterwards as I look through the exhibition again. And everyone else, please do yourself a favor and do that. There's so much that you can experience by going through all the rooms, and especially tactile visions woven.
Yes, and join. I have the honor of being in discussion with Reshma Chiba, Mary Sabande, and Wilhelmine de Villiers, and so we get to focus on their work. So we can join.
Yes, that's at 2:00, right?
Yes.
Or is it 1? Yes.
2. Thank you very much.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.